The afternoon light poured through the tall windows of the Bennett house, painting the living room in soft gold. Clara Bennett sat near the window, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling beside her. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and rain, and the distant hum of the neighborhood filled the silence. It was one of those slow Sundays where time felt heavy and memories crept in through the cracks of quiet moments. Clara had grown used to the stillness of her house since her husband passed away 4 years ago. She kept herself busy tending the garden, baking, volunteering at the local library. But even so, there were days when the silence pressed against her heart. That day, however, felt a little different. Her son Ethan had come home from college for the weekend. He was 21 now, taller than she remembered, his eyes carrying the same curious warmth as his father's. Clara had always been proud of him, not just for his grades or the awards pinned to his name, but for his kindness, his quiet sensitivity. He was studying photography, and every time he visited, he carried his camera around like it was a part of him. "Mom," Ethan said suddenly, leaning against the doorway with that familiar grin, "can I take your picture?" Clara looked up, startled. "My picture? Why?" "Because I need a subject for a project," he said, walking closer, camera in hand. "We're working on portraits, real ones. I want to photograph you." Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. "Oh, Ethan, you should pick someone else. I'm hardly interesting enough for that." But he only smiled. "You are to me." Something about the way he said it made her pause. His voice wasn't teasing. It was sincere. Ethan had always seen things differently. Light, faces, places. He could make an ordinary street corner look poetic. And now, standing there with his camera, he looked at her the same way. As if she were something worth capturing. She hesitated. It had been years since anyone had pointed a camera at her. There were plenty of photos of her holding Ethan as a baby, birthdays, holidays, smiling beside her late husband, David. But since then, she'd avoided cameras. It wasn't vanity, she simply didn't like seeing time written across her face. The fine lines, the softening around her eyes, reminders that life had moved forward, whether she was ready or not. Still, she could see the excitement in Ethan's eyes. He was so full of creative energy, always chasing stories through his lens. Maybe this was her chance to be part of one. "All right," she said finally, setting her coffee aside. "But don't make me regret this." Ethan grinned. "You won't." He adjusted his camera and motioned for her to stay by the window. The soft light spilled across her face, catching in the strands of her chestnut hair that were just starting to turn silver. He didn't ask her to pose. He didn't tell her to smile. He simply began clicking, capturing her in quiet moments, her hand brushing a curl from her cheek, her gaze drifting toward the trees outside, the small, wistful smile that came without warning. Clara tried to act natural, but inside her heart was fluttering. There was something oddly intimate about being seen this way. Not as a mother or a neighbor or a woman going about her day, but as herself. Just Clara. "Look at me for a second," Ethan said softly. She turned her eyes toward him, and for a moment time seemed to slow. She saw the little boy who used to tug at her sleeve, asking her to watch his drawings, to listen to his stories. Now he was grown, holding a camera steady, studying her with a depth she hadn't expected. Click. Perfect. He whispered. After a few more shots, he lowered the camera. "That's all I need," he said, smiling. "You were amazing." Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "It's strange," she admitted. "Being looked at like that, like what?" Ethan asked, "Like I matter in a photograph." He tilted his head, confused but gentle. "You do matter. You always have." She smiled faintly, touched by his honesty. Ethan went upstairs soon after to upload the photos, leaving Clara alone again in the quiet. The afternoon sun had shifted. Golden light now turned to amber. She rose from her chair and walked to the kitchen to pour herself another cup of coffee. The reflection in the window caught her attention, faint, soft, but undeniably her. She studied her face, tracing the outlines that life had drawn there. For years, she'd thought those lines made her invisible. Now she wondered if they made her real. A light knock at the door broke her thoughts. She opened it to find Daniel Hales standing on her porch holding a small bag of fresh apples from his yard. He was in his early 50s, tall, with kind blue eyes and a voice that carried calmness. He'd been her neighbor for almost a decade. Since losing his wife, he'd become a quiet presence in Clara's life, fixing leaky faucets, helping with groceries, checking in after storms. They shared coffee sometimes, or stood by the fence talking about little things, gardens, books, the weather. "Thought you might like these," Daniel said, handing her the bag. "They're sweet this season." She smiled, grateful. "You always bring too much." "Then you'll just have to make pie again," he replied with a small grin. Clara laughed softly. "You just want another slice, don't you?" "Maybe," he said, eyes twinkling. Before she could respond, he nodded toward the house. "I saw Ethan with his camera earlier. What's he working on this time?" "Me," she said, surprised by how the word sounded out loud. "He wanted to take my photo for one of his projects." Daniel's brows lifted slightly. "You agreed?" "Eventually," she said. "He can be persuasive." He smiled warmly. "I can see why. You'll make a beautiful subject." The compliment caught her off guard. She felt her cheeks warm. It wasn't the kind of flattery that felt empty. It was quiet, genuine. Daniel had a way of saying simple things that carried weight. "Well," he said after a pause, "I should let you get back. Tell Ethan I'm looking forward to seeing his work." "I will," she said softly. When she closed the door, her heart was beating a little faster than before. She stood there for a moment, apples still in her hand, the warmth of Daniel's words lingering like a forgotten melody. She couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her like that, not through a lens, but through kindness, that night. As the sun dipped below the hills, Clara sat alone on the porch, thinking about how quickly a simple day had turned into something that felt alive. Maybe it was the way Ethan had looked at her through the camera. Maybe it was Daniel's soft smile. Or maybe it was the quiet realization that life wasn't done showing her beautiful surprises yet. She looked out toward the darkening sky and whispered to herself, maybe it's not too late to be seen again. And for the first time in a long while, she believed it. The next morning came with soft gray skies and the scent of rain in the air. Clara woke to the sound of quiet footsteps and the faint hum of her son's camera shutters somewhere in the house. She smiled, amused. Ethan always rose early when he had a creative idea. After a quick breakfast, he appeared in the kitchen, camera around his neck, excitement written all over his face. "Mom," he said, "I want to take a few more photos, natural ones this time." "You don't have to do anything, just be yourself," Clara laughed, shaking her head. "I can't be myself when you're pointing that camera at me, Ethan." He grinned. "Then pretend I'm not here." That was easier said than done, but she agreed anyway. He moved a chair near the big living room window where the soft morning light spilled across the floor. "Sit here," he said. "The light loves this spot." She sat, her hands resting in her lap, the air calm except for the soft click of his camera. He didn't tell her to pose or smile. He just watched, waiting for small, honest moments. When she adjusted her hair, when she looked toward the garden, when she sighed quietly, click. Every sound of that camera felt like a heartbeat in the still room. At first, she felt nervous, self-conscious. But as minutes passed, the tension faded. Ethan talked while he photographed about his classes, his friends, the city. She listened, her smile natural, her eyes bright. She realized how much she had missed these small, ordinary moments of connection. When Ethan was little, they used to talk about everything, his dreams, her childhood, stories about his father. Now, hearing his voice again, steady and grown, filled her with a mix of pride and nostalgia. "Hold still," he said softly. "That look right there." Click. When he finally lowered the camera, he exhaled deeply, satisfied. "You're a natural," he said. Clara chuckled. "Hardly." "No, really," he insisted. "There's something about your expression. It's calm, but there's a story behind it. That's what I want people to see." She smiled gently, touched by his words. Ethan always had a gift for noticing emotions most people overlooked. Maybe that's what made him such a good photographer. He didn't just capture faces. He captured feelings. After the session, Ethan went upstairs to edit the photos. Clara stayed behind, tidying the kitchen. Outside, the rain had started, soft, steady, rhythmic. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window again, watching the drops slide down the glass. The world looked blurred and quiet, almost peaceful. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She rose, walked to the door, and opened it to see Daniel standing there again, holding a small umbrella and a warm smile. "Morning, Clara," he said. "I brought you some muffins. They're fresh from the bakery." "Daniel, you're going to spoil me," she said, smiling. He shrugged. "Someone's got to make sure you eat breakfast." She laughed and stepped aside to let him in. He took off his coat, careful not to drip water on the floor. Daniel had a kind presence, calm, steady, never intrusive. He made the room feel comfortable just by being in it. "Ethan's home?" he asked, noticing the camera on the table. "Yes," she said. "He's upstairs editing photos. He's been photographing me for some project." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Well, I can see why. You'd make a good subject." Clara blushed slightly. "You're kind, but it's nothing serious. Just a school project." He smiled. "Still, it's nice to be seen through someone else's eyes, isn't it?" His words struck her. She looked down, pretending to arrange the muffins on a plate. "I suppose it is," she said quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain tapped against the windows, filling the silence. Daniel watched her with a soft expression. Not pity, not admiration, just quiet understanding. They had both lived through loss. They both knew what loneliness sounded like. "Would you like some tea?" Clara asked finally. "I'd love some," he said. She poured 2 cups, and they sat together by the window. The light between them was dim and golden, the kind that made everything look gentler. They talked about simple things, his garden, her library work, the unpredictable Seattle weather. But beneath their words ran something unspoken, something that felt like warmth after a long winter. At one point, Daniel glanced at the photos scattered on the table, a few unedited prints Ethan had left out. He picked one up carefully. It was a black and white image of Clara, her eyes turned toward the window, soft light brushing her face. "She looks beautiful," he said quietly, almost to himself. Clara looked over, startled, realizing he was talking about her. Daniel met her gaze and smiled gently. "Ethan has talent," he added, setting the photo down. "But I think what makes this picture special isn't the skill. It's the way he sees you, like someone worth remembering." Clara didn't know what to say. A strange warmth filled her chest, the kind that felt both comforting and frightening. She hadn't thought of herself that way in a long time. After a moment, Daniel stood. "I should get going before the rain gets worse," he said. "Thank you for the muffins," she replied softly. He smiled, putting his coat back on. "You're welcome, Clara. And hey, if Ethan ever does an exhibit, let me know. I'd like to see your portrait there." She laughed lightly, though her heart fluttered at the thought. "We'll see about that." When he left, the house felt quiet again, but not empty. Clara walked back to the table and looked at the photo Daniel had held. For the first time, she studied it closely. The woman in the image looked thoughtful, alive, and oddly radiant. She didn't look like someone who had grown old or faded away. She looked like someone who still had stories left to live. Ethan came downstairs a little later, laptop in hand. "Mom, I've finished editing the photos," he said. "You want to see?" She nodded, curious. He sat beside her and opened the laptop. One by one, the images appeared on screen, each one more striking than the last. Some were soft and warm. Others were sharp and expressive. But in all of them, Clara saw pieces of herself she'd forgotten existed. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "They're honest," Ethan said. "You always told me beauty comes from truth." She smiled, blinking back a sudden sting of emotion. "I didn't realize I still had that truth in me." Ethan closed the laptop and looked at her. "You never lost it." That night, after Ethan went to bed, Clara sat alone again, the photos replaying in her mind. Daniel's voice echoed quietly. "It's nice to be seen through someone else's eyes. She looked out the window at the dark rain-soaked street and felt something stir. Not sadness, not nostalgia, but hope. Maybe being photographed wasn't just about art. Maybe it was about rediscovering the parts of herself she had tucked away, the woman who still dreamed, who still wanted to be seen, who still believed love could find her again. As the rain slowed to a whisper, Clara smiled faintly. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt alive. The evening settled over Maple Creek with a soft golden glow, the kind that makes everything feel intimate. Clara sat in the living room, a blanket around her shoulders, waiting for Ethan to finish his work upstairs. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of his computer. She had poured herself a cup of chamomile tea. But it had gone cold as she stared at the stack of printed photographs Ethan had left on the table earlier. She had touched them lightly, feeling the texture of the paper, the depth in each image. It was strange seeing herself through his eyes. Not the mother, not the widow, not the neighbor, just Clara, alive and present. When Ethan finally came downstairs, he carried his laptop with a mixture of excitement and nervous pride. "Mom, I want you to see them," he said. His eyes sparkled in the soft lamplight, and there was a quiet intensity in his tone that made her heart flutter. She followed him to the couch and sat beside him, leaning forward as he opened the laptop. The first photo appeared on the screen. It was of her at the window, sunlight falling across her face. Clara blinked, taken aback. She didn't see age or wrinkles. She saw warmth, a quiet strength. A woman who had lived fully and yet still had so much to give. The next image showed her laughing softly, eyes half closed, head tilted as though she had just heard a secret. Another captured her holding a cup of tea, lost in thought. And yet there was something magnetic in her gaze. Each photo told a story. Clara's chest tightened with emotion. "Ethan, these are incredible," she whispered. "They're you," he said simply, not needing to explain further. "Not just the outside, but everything you are. You always told me to look for truth in my work. This is the truth of you." She looked at him, seeing the earnestness in his eyes, the way he always noticed the small things, the hidden parts of people that most ignored. He wasn't just photographing her. He was revealing her carefully, lovingly. "You could show these to others," he continued. "A gallery, maybe. People would see what I see." Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. "No one would care about me on a wall, Ethan." "But they would," he insisted. "People would feel something. You have something that matters, Mom. Don't hide it." The words lingered long after he went upstairs to finish other edits. Clara stayed on the couch, her hands resting on the laptop, her mind spinning. The photos weren't just beautiful. They were a mirror of someone she thought she had lost. She felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. It was a quiet, rising sense of being seen, appreciated, understood. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft ping on her phone. A text from Daniel. "Would love to see those photos sometime." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She hesitated, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. Finally, she typed back, "Maybe you should." The response came almost immediately. "I'd like that." Clara set her phone aside and returned to the photos, scrolling through them again. She noticed things she hadn't before, the way the light hit her hair, the subtle smile she barely remembered making, the way her eyes seemed to hold quiet stories. She felt her heart stirring, a flutter of something long forgotten. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe it was longing, maybe it was hope. The next morning, she couldn't stop thinking about the photographs. She went into the kitchen to make breakfast. But her mind kept drifting to Ethan's work, to Daniel's text, to the strange feeling of being seen. She realized how much she had missed that feeling, not just attention, but recognition, acknowledgement, the sense that her existence still mattered in ways beyond routine and responsibility. When Ethan came down again, she asked him to print a few more copies. "I want to see them in the morning light," she said. "Maybe it will help me understand what you see." He smiled, nodding. "I'll do that." By afternoon, the prints were laid out on the table. Clara ran her fingers over them, tracing the edges. studying the way light and shadow told stories she had forgotten she had lived. One photo in particular caught her eye. It was a candid shot, the kind you didn't stage, the kind that revealed everything without trying. She was looking slightly away from the camera, a soft smile on her lips, her eyes reflecting something gentle, vulnerable, and alive. Daniel knocked on the door that evening. Clara opened it, her hands slightly trembling. She had debated whether to show him the photos, worried about appearing vain or overly sentimental. But there he stood, kind and patient, with an understanding smile. "I heard from Ethan that you've been photographed," he said lightly. "I'd love to see." The weekend arrived with a crisp, clear morning, the kind of sunlight that seemed to highlight every color of autumn in Maple Creek. Clara woke early, her heart fluttering with anticipation. Ethan had whispered excitedly the night before about a small local photography exhibit he and his classmates had organized at the community art center. And she had been invited not just as a spectator, but as a guest whose portrait was featured. She felt a strange mix of pride and nerves, unsure what it would feel like to see herself displayed for others to observe. By mid-morning, they arrived at the art center. The walls were adorned with photographs of all sizes, capturing a range of subjects: city streets, quiet forests, children playing, old buildings, and faces full of emotion. But the moment Clara walked through the door, her eyes were drawn to one particular photograph. There she was, framed and illuminated in the gentle gallery light. The image captured her in a candid, fleeting moment. The soft curve of her smile, the reflective glint in her eyes, the warmth she radiated without trying. Clara froze. Seeing herself like this, no filters, no pretenses, no attempts to hide, was surreal. She realized she had never really looked at herself through someone else's eyes before. Her reflection in mirrors had always been critical, focused on lines, age, and imperfections. But here, through Ethan's lens, she was alive, radiant, and undeniably present. Ethan came up beside her, a shy but proud smile on his face. "Mom," he said softly, "I wanted people to see you the way I do." She looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "You've done that, Ethan. You really have." She took a step closer to the photograph. She noticed someone else at the gallery. Daniel was standing a few feet away, his eyes locked on the portrait. He looked calm, reflective, and yet there was something in the way he held himself, an admiration, a quiet reverence that made her heart skip a beat. He didn't approach her immediately. He simply observed, as if committing the moment to memory. Clara felt an unexpected surge of emotion. It wasn't just pride in her son or curiosity about herself. It was something deeper, something that resonated in the hollow parts of her heart that had grown quiet after years of loss. She had forgotten how it felt to be seen, truly seen. And now that feeling enveloped her like sunlight. Daniel stepped forward slowly, coming closer but still leaving a respectful distance. "Clara," he said softly, "this is extraordinary. You look like the person I've always known, but somehow even more alive." Her cheeks flushed. She wasn't used to compliments from him that felt personal and meaningful, rather than casual, neighborly kindness. "I thank you, Daniel. I didn't know it could feel like this." He nodded, his eyes steady and sincere. "You deserve it. More than you know." For a moment they just stood there, the soft hum of the gallery around them, the quiet rustle of visitors appreciating the art. Clara felt her chest tighten in a way that was neither anxious nor fearful, but full of anticipation. She realized she had been holding herself back for so long, holding back attention, emotions, even the possibility of love. And now it was as was. Someone had turned a gentle light on all those hidden parts of her heart. Ethan, noticing their interaction, smiled quietly and stepped back. He had given her more than photographs. He had given her a chance to reconnect with life, with herself, and even with the possibilities of the heart. Clara walked slowly toward Daniel, finally closing the distance. "It's strange," she admitted, her voice low. "I never expected to feel this way. To feel visible, appreciated, maybe even wanted again." Daniel's smile softened. "You've always been deserving, Clara. You just needed the reminder." She laughed softly, a sound full of warmth and relief. "Maybe Ethan knew what I needed before I did." Their conversation was interrupted by the quiet clinking of glasses as the gallery opened refreshments. But Clara hardly noticed the noise. She was fully present in the moment, aware of the warmth in Daniel's gaze, the pride in Ethan's eyes, and the sense of possibility stretching out before her like the soft autumn light outside. Later, as the exhibit quieted down and visitors moved on to other displays, Clara and Daniel stepped outside into the crisp evening air. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the kind of sky that made the world feel infinite and full of promise. They walked slowly, side by side, the silence comfortable, the air between them filled with unspoken understanding. "I never thought I'd see myself like that," Clara said, glancing toward the gallery. "It's one thing to know you're alive. It's another to really feel it, to see it reflected back at you." Daniel nodded, his expression gentle. "Sometimes it takes someone else's eyes to show us what we've forgotten, to remind us who we are beneath the routines, the grief, the quiet years." Clara looked at him, her heart fluttering in a way it hadn't for a long time. "And sometimes," she said slowly, "it makes you wonder if there's still room for more, for happiness, for connection." He reached out, brushing a stray leaf from her shoulder, a small gesture that carried a world of meaning. "There's always room," he said softly, "as long as we're willing to see it." For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to believe it. The photographs had started it, a spark, a reminder of who she was. Ethan's love and talent had captured her essence. Daniel's presence had reminded her that life could offer quiet, enduring warmth, even after loss. And now, standing under the soft autumn sky, she realized that life wasn't finished with her yet. Ethan, waiting in the distance with a friend from college, watched quietly as his mother and Daniel spoke. He smiled to himself, satisfied that the simple act of photographing someone had created ripples far beyond what he had imagined. He had set out to capture her image, but in doing so, it helped rekindle the light in her heart. Clara turned back to Daniel, their hands brushing lightly. She felt a connection, not rushed, not forced, but gentle and undeniable. It was the kind of connection that grew from shared history, understanding, and unspoken respect. Her heart was stirring with feelings she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, and yet it felt natural, like a song long forgotten being played again. As the evening deepened and the first stars appeared, Clara took a deep breath, savoring the moment. She realized she didn't need to rush, didn't need to define anything immediately. She could simply be present with herself, with Daniel. With the possibility of love and life rediscovered, Ethan approached finally, giving his mother a quiet nod. "Mom," he said, "you look happy." Clara smiled, her eyes shining. "I am Ethan. I really am." And as they all stood together for a moment,